Welcome to the deep dive. Today we're tackling something really difficult but incredibly important. It stems from an incident back in late November 2024, one that, well, it sent shockwaves across Ethiopia. A truly horrific video surfaced. It showed the grisly murder of a 17-year-old high school student, Dereje Amare, in the village of Dera. And the detail that just grabs you immediately. The source material says the victim was held by armed militias who actually crossed themselves before beheading him with a machete. And even more chillingly, it seems similar acts are increasingly being filmed, by the perpetrators themselves. So our goal today, our mission, is to try and understand the really complex and frankly tragic internal land disputes in Ethiopia. We're using these awful events in Dera as our starting point.
That's right. And for you, our listener, this deep dive is really about unpacking all those layers of conflict. We want to identify the underlying issues and try to grasp why these disputes just keep going, leading to such, well, brutal violence and this really terrifying culture of impunity. We're drawing heavily on insights from a critical piece of research. It's titled Mending Fences. It gives us a really sharp, on-the-ground look at what's a deeply entrenched and profoundly human problem. We really want to give you a concise but still thorough understanding of what's actually happening there.
Yeah, building on that initial shock, the Dereje Amare's death, it's just so clear this wasn't some isolated tragedy. It really shines a light on a terrifying trend. He was just 17. A high school student. And the video, apparently recorded on a mobile phone, shows him being held by these armed militias who then, well, they commit this barbaric act. And the material we've reviewed points to a really disturbing pattern of similar videos online. Things like point-blank executions, even burning a man alive. It's all happening in this context where a culture of impunity seems to have kind of taken root, almost encouraging these acts.
Right. And what's truly unsettling is the self-perpetuating cycle of violence you see. Despite these horrific details, despite the protests they sparked in universities across Oromia, our research suggests there's generally little, or sometimes no, meaningful official action from authorities. Government officials might, release statements blaming extremists. That's the term often used for groups like the Amhara militias. These are armed, often nationalist, youth groups operating in the area. But the public outrage, for whatever reason, often isn't strong enough or sustained enough to force real change. And sadly, Dara, the place where these clashes happen, often just fades from public view again. In Dereje's specific case, he and another teenager who was also killed that day, but off camera, they'd stayed behind, trying to protect their family's cattle. This was after armed militias from bordering Amhara areas had crossed into farming villages and attacked Oromos living there, forcing many people to flee. So this culture of impunity, it isn't just a side effect, it's like a terrifying accelerant. It signals to perpetrators that their atrocities probably won't be punished, and that embeds violence as, well, the norm rather than the exception.
It's quite astonishing, really, when you look at how deep the roots of this conflict go, especially when you look at Dera's history and its geography. And it's really when we look at the location of Dera that the deeper, sort of heartbreaking complexities truly emerge. It's not just some random village. It sits right on the border of Ethiopia's two most populous regions. It's about, 220 kilometers northeast of Addis Ababa, the capital. It's been a site of contention, of violence for a very long time. And significantly, it's one of 16 districts in Oromia's North Showa zone that actually has multiple villages predominantly inhabited by Amharas.
Exactly. And if you connect that to the bigger picture, it explains quite a lot of the underlying tension. Back in the late 2010s, some Amharas living in these villages actually formed a committee. They wanted to voice their discontent. They felt this profound lack of representation in local government. And they wanted services, things like court procedures, conducted in their own language, in Amharic. This wasn't just a minor grievance. It pointed to, systemic challenges in the local governance structures. Their language, their cultural needs weren't being adequately met in day-to-day public services. They actually took these concerns all the way up to the president's office. But at the same time, you had other influential figures, particularly Amhara politicians and regional officials, starting to actively argue that these villages should simply be incorporated into the Amhara region.
And that, well, as you might guess, seems to have really poured fuel on the fire. The material we've seen highlights an absolutely alarming level of violence in Dera just over the past 4 years. We're talking frequent clashes involving heavily armed Amhara militias, Oromo Liberation Army fighters, that's a prominent Oromo armed group, and even government soldiers. And when the fighting gets intense, phone lines, internet services, they often get disconnected, which makes it even harder for the outside world to grasp the full reality of what's happening. And just heartbreakingly, innocent civilians keep paying the price. They often become direct targets themselves.
Yeah, it really raises an important question about how the government is actually approaching these really deep-rooted issues.
Yeah.
Our source suggests the government seems to lack the capacity or maybe the willingness or perhaps even the political skill required to truly address the underlying disagreements. Their main approach seems to be trying to quash armed groups through, well, brute force. Does the source, Mending Fences, offer any insight into why they haven't maybe adopted more political or diplomatic solutions, or perhaps the challenges they face in trying to do that?
That's a really crucial point. The source implies that beyond the immediate violence, the fundamental issue is still this deeply entrenched, often historical disagreement over identity and territory. These aren't just arbitrary lines on a map. They often come from historical population shifts, access to resources, differing views on land ownership rights.
Hmm.
The government's challenge, it seems, isn't just suppressing armed groups. It's about navigating these incredibly complex, often very emotionally charged historical claims without alienating one group or the other. And what's really crucial for you, the listener, to understand is that the problem we see in Dera, it isn't unique. It's mirrored in various other contested areas right across Ethiopia, places where unresolved territorial disputes consistently, tragically breed violence. So what does this all mean for us as we try to make sense of this incredibly complex evaluation? Our deep dive into what's happening in Dera really lays bare the tragic human cost of these unresolved land disputes. Derej Amare's death is just such a stark example of this recurring cycle of violence in these contested areas, and the chilling prevalence of filmed atrocities, horrifying as they are, alongside this culture of impunity where official action is often lacking or just insufficient. It creates a truly dire situation on the ground.
Exactly. And the deeper context, it shows how historical grievances, things about representation, about language, coupled with these explicit territorial claims, like, Amhara politicians arguing villages should just become part of Amhara, how all that fuels these relentless clashes involving various armed groups. And as we've explored, the problems in Dera, they're not isolated. They are mirrored in other contested areas across Ethiopia. The government's challenge, as the research highlights, is huge. Beyond brute force, it really seems to struggle with the capacity or the willingness or maybe just the political finesse needed to truly address these fundamental disagreements.
And that ties back to your journey as our listener in trying to understand these complex global issues. Digging into specific instances like Dara really shows the multifaceted nature of conflict. It goes so far beyond what a headline often conveys. It's about layers of history, identity, governance, and the devastating impact on individual lives. It's about seeing beyond the news, really, into the very human reality.
And if we connect this to the bigger picture, it does raise a really important question, doesn't it? In situations like this, where violence stems from such deep-seated disagreements over identity and territory, and where the ways to resolve things seem insufficient, what are the true pathways to actually mending fences beyond just using brute force? And maybe what role can sustained public attention or perhaps international understanding play, if any, in changing that dynamic?